Well, hello and welcome to the Heart of Leadership with yours truly, Marjorie Burkle. And today with me is my dear friend and longtime colleague, Dr. Lenora Lemay. Lenora holds a PhD that focuses on the narrative conception of hope, which she learned about in her daily interactions at an internationally recognized applied research center. Lenora's expertise, first as a classroom teacher and then as a hope-focused practitioner and researcher across disciplines, helps us to attend to meaningful and relevant ways of relating, acting, feeling, and thinking from a place of hope in our personal and professional lives. So as you can guess, the topic today is about hope and leadership, and how our people-centered leadership community can become dealers in hope. Napoleon Bonaparte said, leaders need to be dealers in hope a long, long time ago. And a recent Gallup study on the topic of what followers need from leaders placed hope as the top priority, followed by trust and compassion. And in a world as politically, socioeconomically, and in every single other way conflicted as ours, this actually makes a lot of sense, right? Yeah. So welcome, Lenora, and thank you for being here today. I am so glad you could join me for this conversation. So let's start at a slightly academic point, which is where you and I really like to be. What's hope?
Oh, the hardest question of all. We'll start.
I know. Let's start with that one.
Yes, yes. It's easy to read about it and to think about it. It's more difficult to describe it. And yet it's something that, as one grade 4 student said, flows through our blood. And I really do believe that we are wired because we're wired to hope. We have hope inside of us. I know it sounds crazy because you said we were going to talk about it theoretically, but I really do think when we talk about hope, if we stay in our head too much with it, then we lose it. So and we don't lose it, but we lose our connection to it because it really is something that is embodied within each of us. And so that tells us that it is something that we actually need to survive. It is a universal need for all human beings. And then the second piece to that is that hope is very different for every single person. We all have different experiences around hope and hoping. And so then we still haven't answered what it is. It is that ability to be able to move ourselves, to think about going forward into the future, to be able to take the next step that we need to take. It's something that helps us to cope with the things that are happening around us. So it's very complex. My colleague, Dr. Rana Jevni, would say that hope and hoping is a science. We can study it, but it's very mysterious. There's so much about it that we don't know. And I think that's why it makes it difficult to describe. Probably the best way to describe it is and I love this definition, it's the yes to life. Because,
Ooh.
yeah, it's, like sometimes we don't feel very emphatic when we feel yes. We go forward timidly because we have something that helps us see ourselves going forward. And so sometimes we shout it out. And how do we keep that balance? Because hope is in some ways the opposite. And I should say it's actually hoping, because hope is something that we hope for at the end. And I think that's in our society, we tend to think of it as a goal when we're working toward a hope. But when we think about hoping as a process and think about it, that it's something that we do, it's an action, and it's it is the opposite of fear, because fear will immobilize it. So it helps us kind of maintain that balance.
I'm so glad you brought fear into this conversation, because in thinking about what is happening specifically in North America right now, we're in uncharted territory. I mean, we don't often talk out loud about this in public, but hey, what's happening between the States and Canada right now is weird. It doesn't really make sense. I mean, we are so intertwined, and employees on both sides are, I think, freezing a little bit in fear. We're holding on to livelihoods, we're holding on to status quos, we're holding on to a lot of things. Um, many years ago, you and I know the saying quite well: if you don't move, you can't get hurt. So I think a lot of employees feel that way right now. If you don't move, I'm going to get hurt. But fear occupies space in their heads that takes away from creativity, innovation, and a big yes to careers, to participating in the workplace 100%. So, how do leaders do this thing? What do you think?
Well, there's lots of thoughts going through my head now because I I started by saying that it's embedded in all of us, and it is. When I was thinking about hope and leadership in more detail in preparation for today, I was thinking back to those people who were hopeful people, mentors, I guess, in my life, those people that I gravitated to, those people that helped me learn about hope in my own life. Then that tells me that we all have the capability to help people feel more hopeful about what's happening around us. But it's how we do that. And so when we know that people gravitate toward hopeful people, and they're hoping that they will, in the hopes that they will make them feel that there's a future that they can go into, that it's not going to all crumble down around us. So it's very important, I think, for leaders, when I think about hope and leadership, it's about finding ways, and we all have those abilities. My good fortune has been having the last 25 years to really spend a lot of time studying different leaders and how they hope, looking at hope from the perspective of how children see it, because I think they can lead us in some ways and how they see it. So
Mm.
I think for leaders, it's doing some reflecting, but there's really small things that, and I'm hope we can talk about some of those small things a little bit later, for individuals to start to make it visible in our lives. And to do that, what I learned, because I came into this work um, because as an educator, I wrote a lot about hope and hopefulness and hopelessness, because as an educator, that's your job, is to be a leader for all those students in your classroom, and to help them see a future that they can go into. But there were many times when I wasn't feeling very hopeful. And I didn't realize that until I started to look back in my journals as I was preparing for some grad studies. And I had a very different topic. And it turned out that my topic became about my own leadership as a hope, and as a hopeful educator, and what that meant. So I think that that reflection, spending some time and thinking about who are those hopeful people in our lives, is one of them, to think about how they've motivated us. But that's not enough. There's so much more. And I I have so many strategies and some practices and ways of thinking about this, but it's really very, very small, little tiny things that we can actually do to help people see that the hope is around them, and to help them access those inner hopes that they have alongside of the fears.
So that kind of touches on something for me where it kind of almost sounds like leaders, I mean, what you had to go through to bring hope to the classroom and to be a hopeful educator, you had to have that very well established and visible in yourself first.
Well, yes.
That was hesitant.
I got very hesitant. I understood it from the perspective, this is what I find just incredible. And I think, as I think of hope and how and the Gallup poll is wonderful, because it makes us stop and think about this in a little bit deeper. So I understood hope as, helping my students reach goals. And if we just worked really hard, we could always reach those goals, because that's what I was taught about hope. And so when I went into this, I actually at first thought, well, actually, I went to the dictionary to look up the word hope. I didn't yesterday, when I was thinking about, what if I'm asked this question? But because hope for me, I had the people around me supporting me. And I think that's what comes down to leadership is how do we support the people to embrace their own hopes, and how do we collectively in our organizations, in our families, in our friends, in our communities, how do we support each other to find the hope by going backwards and thinking forwards at the same time? But I just want to go back to when I came to this, I actually wasn't sure, um, when, because I hadn't experienced a lot of adversity in my life, and I really thought that hoping was for people who, all of a sudden something happens to you in life, and then it happens magically. But that's exactly the reverse of what I learned as I started to go into this. It was more like, whoa, there's a whole lot more to this. And if you wait for something to happen, but you can too, because lots of people have had things happen to them, and then they can access those resources and support each other. But I think that for me was, and I think that happens when we think about hope, because we are taught hope from our culture, where we live, our culture, and if we have, our religious backgrounds, if we have them, I think we're taught some things about hope, and we have those. But what I like about what I've learned from kids and adults, I can be I could have been working with kindergartens one day and management in the healthcare the next day, and I was always learning something, and oftentimes it was the same thing. It was just said a little bit differently. So a lot of the work that I've done has just been kind of thinking about what I was learning alongside of different people, different ages, from all these different places.
Mm.
And so that's what's exciting about it, because it's something that we can make more visible. We can magnify it. My other colleague, Wendy Edie, would talk about magnifying hope and minimizing hopelessness, and how do we do that? And that's really what this work is about.
Well, that would be a useful skill for leaders to learn.
Oh,
To
yes.
magnify hope. Yeah, there's so much here. First of all, I want to touch on hope is not a goal. I mean, when you say it like hope is like something that you pull in when things go wrong, or I mean, when you said that, it's like my son loves to take me on roller coasters, and I hate roller coasters, but I did that in exchange for he will eventually look after me when I'm old. And I'm old, he's not looking after me. So besides the point, I would sit in that roller coaster and close my eyes. It's like, I hope I live at the end of this. And so that's kind of what comes up when you say hope is like a goal. It's like something catastrophic is happening, like you're going upside down at 100 miles an hour, and you hope you live at the end of it. But that's not that's what you found. It is not.
Well, it is that, and.
Oh, is that okay? Fair enough.
That's a word that I learned from my colleagues when I was at the Applied Research Center, the Hope Foundation of Alberta, because we were studying hope, and that was the role, was for us to sit with other people and to figure out what this thing called hope was and how it worked. And for me, it became and, because I actually talked to people who found themselves living with extended disability, saying that one of the reasons they felt that maybe things didn't go well for them and they found themselves living with disability was because they had difficulty setting goals. And so, yeah, that was and then that made me think about all the students, and I guess as a leader, all the people that we work with, and how we think about hope is about setting goals, but it is something and more for me, how I've learned to conceptualize it in my interactions with other people and the research that I've been reading. And I think this is when I started to read work by Václav Havel. He was an artist. He dramatist, drama. He worked in drama. He was an activist, and then he became playwright. That was the word I was looking for. And then he eventually became the president of Czechoslovakia. And he really said that hoping is not the same thing as optimism. It's not the conviction that things will turn out well necessarily.
Oh.
But the certainty that whatever happens makes sense. And oftentimes and I think that's where this whole notion of the process of hoping and delineating because oftentimes we believe there are certain ways to reach certain goals. You do these things, but if goal setting is something that you have difficulty with, that can be problematic, first of
Mm.
all. But if you think about hoping as being okay with how things turn out, you're involved in the process, and that's the action piece of it. And I think that's where it becomes really exciting for leadership, because people are looking at you, and you are obviously, people know that because 52% of the respondents, that's huge, said that that's what they looked for first in a leader. So we know that's really important, and leaders want to exude that hope. But if we think about it as being engaged with those we're interacting with and figuring out what that means as we move forward, hope is I have a book on my shelf, it's called Hoping, Moping, and Coping. Um, I love it. Again, by Dr. Rana Jevi, and she talks about the fact that, hope helps us get through the difficult times. It helps us cope. But if we mope too long, then that can become problematic. So I think this is where some of the strategies that I've learned and the practices, being alongside people, because it was what I did, still do. I'm still very interested in it. Obviously, because it is about, it does help us get through sometimes even the good times, because our lives, we don't, sometimes we can get just sort of, I don't want to use the word stuck, but content. And
Mm.
and we, and that's one of the reasons why I left the classroom when I did. I saw a photograph of myself in front of the whiteboard, in front of my students, and I looked like I was falling asleep. And when I looked at that, I said, I should go back and do something. And I had some interest. And then, like I said earlier, I fell into the whole area of looking at making a difference in understanding what this whole thing about hope was.
Mhm. So, hope is a goal.
Hmm.
Goals create hope,
Yeah.
and there is a process of hope. So, if no, I'm going to put you on the spot now. You had to teach hope to a leader. Leaders coming to you. It's like, Lenora, how do I become a dealer of hope? What do I have to do? What would you teach them?
Well, here's the thing. I would do, like I said earlier, what I did, what I would have done, what I did at the Hope Foundation when I was first starting. And that is to find a way for people to be able to do activities where they could, and the word reflection is very important in hope, because it's a word that comes up. And I know leaders do this all of the time. We are always reflecting on our practice, but one of the most important things is to find a way for leaders to be able to come together in some way so that they could uncover their own hopes and think about who they are as leaders, and to think about some of the things that we actually have coined when, like hope suckers, when they come around. I learned that from grade 8 students, and that was something
Hope
we did
suckers.
when the hope suckers come around. I learned that from grade 8 students, took that back to the Hope Foundation. That's become very important in a lot of the work that was done in many different areas. But I think the most important thing is to invite leaders to be able to say, it's not something that you could come and do once. It's something that we start, and we build on it over time. And how do we do that? Because and the word teach, and you and I have had a lot of conversations about that word. And
Mhm.
that was one of the things that I think, as an educator, when I came to study hope, I thought I was teaching my students about hope. But I think I have definitely turned that around, and that's why we've had such wonderful conversations about it, because we agree. It's about how do we learn together? How do we support our learning, and how do we have discussions about what we're learning along the way? So if I had an opportunity to work with leaders, we would come together every once in a while it doesn't have to be face to face. Face to face is
Mm.
nice. But in this, I think COVID taught us a lot, and we know as leaders that being able to come together in many different ways over a long, over a period of time is an opportunity to take, one idea that maybe came from the work at the Hope Foundation, because really the work started in psychology at the Hope Foundation. That was how we wanted to understand, the founders of the Hope Foundation wanted to understand how you could intentionally use practices to increase quality of life, really. So that's where it started. And so taking some of those strategies and saying, okay, let's try this together, and then let's see what happens when you go out, maybe for a month, and you reflect on it when you're in the month and think about what's happening for you as a leader, what's happening for the people around you, and then come back and let's share stories. What happened, what did you learn? And if it was me, and if we were doing this is how I've done most of my work, even when I was with children. um, Whenever I had an opportunity, it would be coming in more than once. And if it was in a classroom, I wasn't the one doing the teaching. It was the teacher and I sitting in a group in a circle with the students, and we were learning together. Then I would say, hey, this is what I learned over here. What do you think of this?
Mhm. So the process basically embraces adult learning, where and we're building on each other's experiences rather than dispensing wisdom, which is the foundation of people-centered leadership as well. Because we always ask leaders to stop dispensing wisdom and to stop giving advice, and we relieve them of the duty to be know-it-alls. And some of them really feel relieved at the end of that, and some of them feels a little bit blow to the ego. But building on hope then is an active, conscious process of thinking about it, reflecting on it, and at the end of the day, maybe thinking is like, how did I do on hope today? Did I bring hope, or did I suck hope out of the organization? Did I bring hope to the conversation, or did I suck it out of the air? And that is an interesting awareness. How would you know if you suck hope out of the air?
We know.
We know. Okay.
I think we do, and that's why I love this work, because and I think that's, I mean, how do people know who to gravitate to?
True.
No? So I mean, well, I'm not, I'm thinking as we're talking too about this, because um when I first learned about hope suckers, it was like this, and it happened really by accident, because I had actually gone into a classroom, and I actually wanted to, I asked them about hope, and there was silence. And so I had to, and that's so much about hope, is sometimes we're on a trajectory and we think we're going somewhere, and then we realize, there was a moment when I realized that I had to change course quickly, and I had to do a 180-degree turn, because
Mm.
their teachers were watching me. I was in front of the classroom, but I wanted to start a conversation. And then it's the work that we do is very creative. And I have my own life. I've just become more creative as I've worked with this. I feel so much more courageous and confident, and it just feeds me, and that's what I want for people. And I know it can happen in organizations, because I saw that with some of the organizations that I worked with. But I just, going back to that hope sucker. So when I left that class, I started to think about hope sucking kind of behavior, and I think sometimes it's just, when we look at someone and it's just a slight facial expression that someone makes, that we've sucked the hope out of them. It can be a comment, um, even an eye blink. And I think we know, and that's the beauty of this. Then we go away and we're searching for clues. It's like being a detective somehow, and we get better at it over time. And I think that's the exciting piece of this, is we each get better in our own way. We start in our own, wherever we are, And we take that and we build on that because we are learning from people, alongside of us. And I think, you know, I know I talk a lot, but um, when, thinking back to when hope was first introduced into the American Psychiatry Association, it wasn't until 1915, it was 1959. Philosophers
1959.
59. Philosophers, theologians had written a lot about hope throughout time. I mean, we have all of these writings about hope and its importance in our life. It wasn't until 1959 that Carl Menninger said, you know what, our cupboards are bare. And that's why the Hope Foundation was formed, because Dr. Javani was working um, with people at a cancer institute, and she went to look for information because it was all about hope, about getting out of bed in the morning. That's who coined that hope is the yes to life, was Dr. Javani. And she said, why can't I find any information about this? That was in 1980. So nurse researchers started to write and to do research about hope in the 1980s. So it's kind of came together a little bit. In education, we still focus a lot on the goal setting theory of hope, which is fine. It's good. But I always say, and there's more, because sometimes we're not going to pull out, we're not going to see. If we don't make it visible and we're only in our head, can't see what's in someone's head. But if we start talking about leading with hope and putting kids always put their hands over their hearts when they talk about hope. It's a very relational.
So
It is really cool. And then kids told me that wishing is in the head, hoping is in the heart. So when we start to lay these things out on the table and to look at them and build on those, our fears do shrink a little bit. And I, I mean, there's so much to learn, but and I know I have a lot more to learn. So in business, we know the Gallup poll has told us now twice how important it is. I would I would love to, work with people so we built some more information about what it looks like, because sometimes I think it scares me a little to think that someone's looking at me and hoping that I'm going to inspire their hope when I'm a little scared too. But if we're sharing that and we're talking about it and we're building as a team, we're going to know that that person really is thinking about us and caring for us in a way that is hopeful.
you put up two things here for me that I want to jump back to. The first one, of course, is what's the difference between a hope and a wish?
Well, they're cousins. We call that we use language like that sometimes when we were learning about this, because it was more fun and we wanted to have fun as we were doing this. I think that was one of the things, being along researchers who could be inspired by what we were learning and have fun. So we called them cousins. I think the grade 4 students who I was called in to work with them. But I came to the Hope Foundation. I was in a program where youth were volunteering to bring hope to people in extended care centers. So I was seeing kids who had a lot of hope. And then when I was asked to come in by these teachers who were very worried about their students' futures, I was like, oh no. But I went in, I had a little bit of research where a researcher had asked children who were homeless to draw hope, and they could all draw hope and they could all talk about it, even though they were living they were living in their cars, maybe with their parents. So I knew, and so I took that in and I said, why don't we start here? That's how I do my work. Why don't we start here? This is what I know from research. Here, I was called out a week later because these teachers were like, holy man, you should see what these kids are doing. They're leading us. They're taking us into the conversation of hope. And when I went into the classroom, they had wishing is in the head and hoping is in the heart. And wishing it's not active. Because if I think that's the difference. Wishes inform our hopes, and that's important. And uh, we need to have wishes because they're like goals. We need to have them. If we didn't, then when I think about, how important is hope how important hope is to our survival and our daily living and that yes to life, we need to want to wish for things, whatever they may be. But that relational piece, and that's where kids, because when I was working with those kids who talked about who told me about hope suckers, we ended up putting all the things that took away their hope on whiteboards because I had to do that at 180-degree turn when they weren't talking to me in junior high about what hope was, because they were like, what is this crazy lady doing up there? But then when I said, well, then what takes away our hope, which I had to have the courage, like I thought, what if they don't say anything? I mean, I would have come up with something else, hopefully, but they did. We filled 2 whiteboards because there were 2 whiteboards in the classroom. We could have filled more. And they said, that's when we were going to make hope shields at that time. So we did a lot of those kinds of things like I said, with adults and with kids. And that's when they said to me, you put the hope shield over your heart when the hope suckers come around. So with leaders, it would be the same way. It would be, what is on our hope shields? And our hope, I think that's the other thing. Our hope shields and our, and how the resources and sources of hope shift. And that's the other thing about hope that's really important for us to think about. I can feel very hopeful in this moment, but I can leave this space and something can happen. I could go somewhere, and in a minute, our hopes, they ebb and they flow. And so some of us have more of a disposition towards hope. We're more hopeful people. We're more optimistic, and some of us aren't, the half glass, half full. But our hopes will shift and change. So hoping is something that's very fluid. Wishing is more, it's in the moment. Yeah, I think that's maybe more of a definition than you were hoping for, but yeah, that's how I see it.
So kind of what I'm getting is a wish is like it's in your head and it can stay there, where your hope that your wish will become realized will be like ebb and flow. And now, does that ebb and flow according to your mood, or is it?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
And what happens? Sometimes it can be our mood. I mean, I think people who are more prone to have anxiety, have a harder time to hope, right? Maybe that has, there's many reasons for people to have anxiety. Some of it is, those fears that they've had before and they couldn't realize them. But I think wishing informs. I do another activity where we put all of our wishes, hopes, and dreams in one spot. And Marta, you've seen this. So we don't delineate them. We leave them, because sometimes a wish can turn into something that becomes a hope over time. If you start to act on it, then it can become a hope. And it's like Václav Havel said, hope is different from optimism. And that's the same thing, because optimism is kind of how we're feeling about something. How optimistic are we something that a goal is going to happen, or that we can actually act on a wish? So our wishes are kind of precursors to hope in some way. But I understand hoping now as it's more of an embodied, it's not just in our mind, whereas wishing can be stuck up here. But when we think about, and you use the word hope is about our relationships, it's about feelings, it's about the behaviors, and it's about our thinking. And researchers that I've worked with who actually came up with these 4 characteristics of how hope is exhibited in our life, they put thinking at the end. Or maybe, I don't know, because sometimes and I think that's where we get stuck sometimes with hope, is it has been, we confuse it maybe, and that's maybe not the right word, but we use it in the same way that we would use wishing. And then that's where people think hope is a useless thing, because they see it as the same thing as a wish. And sometimes if we wish and we don't do anything, and we say, well, that never came about, that was just a waste of time. But if we have ways where we can enact them into hopes, that's where it becomes, and then it becomes part of our journey. And one of the things that I did when I was first learning about hope, I actually took a university course. When I became interested in it, it was available back then. So we had to do a kind of in your life, the ebbs and the flows. And what did you do to get out of these, ebbs, and get up into the higher points of your life? And that would then help us when we're talking about these times right now, might be one of those things that leaders could do. I had other times in my life where my hope was a little less, and measuring hope is kind of hard, but it felt like didn't feel as hopeful. So what did I do? What did I do during that time? And that's where we're pulling our own resources from inside, and wherever it comes from.
Correct. So there were 2 points that, and the one was and I lost it now. I know. What hope and a wish, and the difference between hoping and wishing. But there was another point about hope. You know what? Tell me more about things that take hope away. And then the other point's going to come back. I know it's going to come back.
Well, because it's different for everyone, I think in our everyday experiences, it's the tiny little things like, and I think one of them is um, a look from someone when we're excited about something, and just the look that we look at someone, that's a big one. And I think and in leadership, it's really important because sometimes, and if you're like me, my face shows everything. And I was in a meeting a little while ago, and I was thinking about something, and I wasn't thinking about how my face looked, but someone said, what's wrong?" Right away, "What's wrong?" But because I have we worked together, they knew to ask me right away, and they could do that in a way. And I think that's what we want in leadership. We want them to be working. And to me, I keep doing this because I think when people are looking up here for something, they think they're, and I was thinking about the word followers, and I know that that's the word that the Gallup poll used because it's people who are working with. But you and I always think of this, right? We think about, yeah. So, that person could then, say, well, and immediately that person was confident enough with me to be able to ask right away. And I just said, "Oh no, I'm just thinking. I'm trying to think about how that would work." So that's the kind of relationship we want to build with leaders. Because I think sometimes we say, well, you have to do this, you have to be a visionary. But what does hope look like, sound like, feel like, and what does a hope sucker look like? Those are the things we need to unpack. I think the biggest hope sucker right now, like you said, are all of the things that are happening in our world and worrying about things that we can't control. And that's the biggest part. Those hope suckers take out the things that they kind of make us feel that we can't be in control of things, and we can't be. And that's why it's so critical that we do this work all of the time, because the reality is most of life we can't control. So if we have strategies to be able to manage, and that's where Valclav's definition for me is so critical. When I read that, I went, oh yes, it's about being able to manage those times when the hope suckers come in. And we're not going to be able to solve all problems, but can we still get something else? Can we still come out in a different way and maybe discover or uncover something new? Wow, that happens all the time. Did that help?
Yeah, you brought my thought back. Fear and hope. And so fear moves hope away, hope moves fear away. But what you said earlier reminded me of vulnerability and leadership. And to marry a conversation in an organization, and a lot of people will have to do that right now because they're going to be impacted by crazy tariffs. And it's going to go both ways. So it sits on both sides of the fences. I mean, it's like, what is actually going? What is it going to look like? So the normal people are like, how's it going to impact our day-to-day lives? Are we still going to be able to buy groceries? Those of us who like stuff that are imported from the States, like Kirkland toilet paper, are we still going to be able to get that toilet paper? So it's those things. But in organizations, it's like, are we still going to be here on the other side of this? In 10 days' time, what's going to happen with the subsidiary? What's going to happen with that? And those leaders are living in fear themselves, and their teams still need them to bring hope to the organization. And it reminds me of our first podcast with Trevor Muir. His company was SharePoint, was going through a torrid time. And he was new at being the CEO, and not a suit-wearing type of CEO either, which it makes him very accessible. It's just part of his personality. And he told his team, it was like, we're in shit. And I don't know how we're going to get out of here, but I do know that we will get out of here. And I'm going to need everybody's help because I don't have the answers. And it spoke just that conversation. I mean, I'm definitely not quoting him here 100%. That's kind of the gist of the conversation. Spoke to hope and fear simultaneously, and they could live together in the same place.
Mhm. I think that's really critical. When I was reflecting, I've thought a lot about the Gallup poll surveys and how people look to leaders. And I think when people look to leaders, and you mentioned the word vulnerable, because I think that's the key here. We're all in this together. And when you were talking about Trevor, I just was like, he's such a hopeful leader. He said, we are in this together. What are we going to do? And I think embracing that and not sugarcoating it and saying, oh, don't worry about it. We're going to be fine. Because right now we can't say that. We're in the place now where we can't say that.
Yeah.
And I mean, so he is one of those leaders, of course, and his team probably rose to obviously they did. They rose to the occasion because they will when they come together. And we've seen that in our country where people who maybe weren't working together are now working together. And that's what's the beauty of this is, but I think in our organizations, we want this to be happening all of the time, right? Can we imagine if, because there was a team that came together and said, yeah, we'll just pitch in and we'll do this. And what about this over here? And what about there? And I think back to one of the leaders one of my mentors who is a leader who, every day, and we weren't in crisis. It was a school. We weren't in crisis, but every day he visited every classroom in the school and to get something I don't like to use with hope, but it was kind of like a barometer. Where were people at? What did they need? What did I need? And he didn't come in and he didn't bring in any solutions or anything. So I think about the leaders who, like Trevor, who will say, okay, and be honest. And that's where I was really focusing my thoughts on in hope and leadership, because people are expecting us to take care of them. And I like what Trevor did, and I think this is where leaders are going to be able to just go in and say, hey, this is something that I don't know the answer to, because that's why we gravitate to people sometimes, because that's part of the hope, is that we know that they'll take care of us. But we're much more powerful, and we then take out the resources, and then the people who are in the organizations can think, well, if I can do this in my business, I'm going to go home and maybe I won't be so fearful there. Maybe my family maybe I can sit down and do some of what I'm doing from work at home, so they don't bring those fears into the workplace. Because I think that there's so many places that we feel fearful. Two researchers did some amazing work, and many researchers talk about, in different play, and I know that this is something that psychologists would use. What are some hopes in this context? How are you hopeful in this context over here? And how can we marry some of that? So when I was talking about they take these things from home, some people will bring things that they're doing at home. Well, in our family, we're doing this. And then if we engage with the people who are in our organizations and say we're in this together all of the time, and we're hearing their stories, we're hearing their strengths, really. We're hearing about times when they had to overcome things that they didn't even think about, where they were engaging their hope.
Yeah.
So we build on those stories and those strengths of theirs. So one of the things I just want to mention, sometimes, I don't know how many times I've felt like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do, since I've started, since I hung out with psychologists who were dealing in hope and inspiring hope in people who were, really struggling. And sometimes they would just say something like, what's the smallest thing we can do right now? The smallest thing, we do all of these things. What can we do right now? And that is such an important strategy. Our language, our hope language, is really, really critical. In my other life right now, I'm working with people who are living with homelessness. And we were working on the really big problem up here. But just so that when we left, we all said, what was the smallest thing that we were going to do? Just something just to kind of not become discouraged? What was something small that each one of us were going to do? So I think for me, now when I relate it to the situation, with what's going on, it's like, what's something that I can do that will help me think that maybe in the future, if things do go sideways, and notice I use the word if and not when. When is, like if is probably won't. That actually helps me feel more hopeful. When you want something to happen, you use when, because you then are motivated. It's that feeling that comes out. But I'm thinking, okay, something really silly is that I'm going to plant more in my garden. Well, I love gardening, so there's all that, but that makes me think, okay, I have a little bit of a plan, and we can do that in our organizations.
Yeah. I love having the consciousness of the ifs and the whens, and thinking about one small thing I can do right now. What is one small thing we can do together right now in our team? Yeah. So this is an amazing conversation, but I think we are.
I could talk all day about
I know. We've done it. We're known for it. So, in conclusion here, this is what I've picked up from you. Is like goals give us hope, and hope can be a goal. But hope is embodied in us, and it's also a process. And it's about consciously thinking about hope. Was I a dealer in hope? Or was I a hope sucker? Did that conversation bring hope or destroy hope? How am I presenting myself as a leader in a way that's hopeful to those around me? And how am I bringing hope into myself as a leader? Because you kind of have to have it to be able to be a dealer in it. And I love the idea that hope is not necessarily, it's not related to positivity and optimism. You're right. And hoping that it would all make sense in the end. And it's a yes to life and a yes to working together. It's a yes thing. So this is just a bucket full of wisdom. And I think once I listen to it again, I'll pick a lot more stuff out of here. If you could give our people-centered leadership audience a few last thoughts on the topic of becoming dealers in hope, what would it be?
Well, your summary really, you did a beautiful job summarizing, because I was going to say, oh, but what, and you covered everything. I think I would give the same, I would say the same thing that I say at the end of every time that we're together. Go out, look around you, find something that makes you feel hopeful, because I think the most important thing is that once we start being consciously aware of it, and I know this happens, just that awareness of what does it look like, what does it sound like, and what does it feel like. And that's one of the activities. So, and if you want, however you represent that for yourself, and make that kind of become a little researcher on, and not maybe even little, but it will be something that it guides you. I think, to me, that's the most important advice I can give, because that's going to start you on a different trajectory right there and take you someplace where you need to go.
That's awesome, Lenora. Thank you so very, very much for spending time with us today. And this is a wrap.